When the moving truck pulled into the quiet suburban cul-de-sac, the air felt calm and welcoming. The house at the end of the street had been on the market for months, and when I finally signed the papers, I felt like I had secured a hidden gem. It was a charming, freshly painted two-story home with a spacious yard, shaded by a towering oak tree. The location was perfect, close to town, yet free from the suffocating oversight of any neighborhood association. At least that's what the real estate documents promised. As the movers carried furniture into the house, I noticed a woman standing across the street. She was stiff, arms crossed, glaring intently at the boxes being unloaded. Her expression never softened, not even when I waved politely. I brushed it off, assuming she was just curious about her new neighbor. But within an hour, she marched over, clipboard in hand, and introduced herself, not as a neighbor, but as the president of the neighborhood HOA. She spoke with a rehearsed confidence, pointing out supposed rules and regulations I would need to follow. The problem was, my property wasn't part of her HOA at all. According to my deed and legal description, my house sat just outside the HOA boundary. At first, I assumed it was a harmless mistake. Maybe she didn't realize where the line was drawn, but her tone was anything but casual. She insisted that I was in violation simply for moving in without permission. It was clear she saw herself as the gatekeeper of the entire block, regardless of whether she had jurisdiction. That evening, as I unpacked, her shadow passed by my windows multiple times. She lingered near my driveway, watching every movement, as though waiting for me to break some invisible rule. The unsettling feeling grew stronger by the hour. I had moved here for peace and independence. Instead, I had apparently landed right in the sights of a self-declared enforcer who refused to accept that her reach ended at my property line. And it was only the first day. The real trouble began when she realized I wasn't going to bend to her authority. The next morning, I stepped outside to water the plants and found a bright piece of paper taped to my front door. It was formatted like an official notice, complete with HOA letterhead and bold red text. It claimed I was already in violation of multiple community standards: grass too long, paint color unapproved, and fence height exceeding the maximum limit. I stared in disbelief. Not only were these claims false, but again, the HOA had no control over my home. Still, the intent was clear: intimidation. As I pulled the notice down, the woman from across the street appeared, arms folded tightly. She stood there silently, waiting for me to acknowledge her. Her presence felt less like a neighborly concern and more like surveillance. I calmly explained again that my property wasn't part of her HOA. I even showed her the boundary map included in my deed. She didn't even look at it. Instead, she doubled down, saying that everyone on this street had to follow her rules. The rest of that week followed a similar pattern. Each day, a new bogus notice appeared on my door. One morning it was about trash bins being visible. Another about unsanctioned lawn furniture. Each time I tossed the papers away, but her persistence made it clear she wasn't going to stop. Then came the unannounced visits. She would stride across the street and stand in my yard, pointing at random things as if cataloging offenses. More than once, I caught her peering into my backyard through the fence, clipboard in hand. What unnerved me most wasn't just her obsession with control, but the way some neighbors seemed to watch from their porches as it all unfolded. Some looked sympathetic, others indifferent, but no one intervened. The illusion of a quiet new beginning had shattered. My house no longer felt like a sanctuary, but a battleground in her campaign to force me under her rule. And I knew, sooner or later, she would escalate beyond notices and petty harassment. The escalation came faster than I expected. This time, she involved reinforcements. By the end of the second week, I discovered that the self-proclaimed enforcer wasn't acting alone. One Saturday morning, as I carried groceries inside, a group of 3 people appeared at my front door. They introduced themselves as members of the HOA board, and each carried their own clipboards stacked with papers. They claimed they were there for an inspection. Without invitation, they walked around my property, jotting notes, murmuring among themselves as if documenting crimes. I followed them, reminding them again that my property was legally excluded from their jurisdiction. But just like their president, they ignored every word. The most surreal moment came when one of them pointed at my mailbox, declaring it non-compliant. Another criticized the color of my shutters. They even measured the distance between my fence posts. It was absurd, invasive, and deeply unsettling. After about 20 minutes, they left a packet on my doorstep. Inside was a list of violations, along with a threat of fines totaling over $1,000. The letter warned that continued non-compliance could result in liens or even foreclosure proceedings. I knew it was nonsense, but the psychological weight was heavy. They wanted me to believe I was powerless, that resisting their demands would only lead to financial ruin. For someone less stubborn or less informed, it might have worked. That evening, as I sat on my porch, the HOA president stood across the street again, arms folded, her glare unwavering. She wanted me gone, and now she had a board to back her up. But what she didn't anticipate was that I wasn't just a passive homeowner. I had already started documenting everything, every bogus notice, every unwanted visit, every trespass into my yard. If they wanted a war, I would be ready. And soon enough, the first legal shots would be fired, but not by me. A week later, I received an envelope in the mail. It was a certified letter from the HOA's attorney, claiming that I was legally bound to their covenants. They demanded immediate compliance and payment of fines, or they would begin legal action. I read the letter twice, my frustration turning into a cold determination. This was no longer an overzealous neighbor with a clipboard. This was an organized attempt to bully me into submission through intimidation and false authority. I reached out to my own attorney, who reviewed my deed and the HOA's claims. His response was immediate and confident. The HOA had no jurisdiction whatsoever. Their boundary map excluded my property entirely. Their threats were baseless, and their attempts to enforce their rules on me amounted to harassment and trespassing. We drafted a cease and desist letter, warning the HOA to stop immediately or face legal consequences. Copies of boundary maps and property records were attached. I sent the letter via certified mail, making sure they couldn't claim ignorance. But instead of backing off, the HOA doubled down. More notices appeared. More board members showed up at my door. And the president herself grew louder, telling anyone who would listen that I was a rogue homeowner undermining their community. The tension in the neighborhood thickened. Some neighbors avoided me entirely, unwilling to get caught in the crossfire. Others offered quiet words of support, but admitted they feared retaliation if they spoke out publicly. It was clear. The HOA had turned this into a battle of wills. They expected me to cave. They expected me to pack up and leave. But what they didn't realize was that I was only getting started. And in the next round, I would turn their own tactics against them, exposing everything they had tried to keep hidden. Armed with evidence, I decided it was time to stop reacting and start acting. Every notice, every letter, every clipboard inspection had been meticulously documented with photos, videos, and timestamps. I compiled them into a detailed folder that painted a clear picture. The HOA was harassing a homeowner they had no authority over. My attorney helped me draft a formal complaint to the county authorities. We included the cease and desist they ignored, proof of their trespassing, and the fraudulent fines they attempted to impose. At the same time, I reached out to the state's Consumer Protection Division, since false claims of financial liability crossed into the territory of fraud. But the real turning point came when I decided to make my story public. Using local forums and social media, I explained the situation and shared the boundary maps showing my home excluded from the HOA. Almost instantly, the comments flooded in. Other residents from the area admitted they, too, had felt bullied by the same HOA. Stories surfaced about unfair fines, intimidation tactics, and even attempts to force homeowners into costly, approved renovations. It became clear that this HOA president and her board had been ruling through fear for years. Now, their pattern of behavior was out in the open, and people were furious. Within days, local reporters picked up the story. A news van showed up on the cul-de-sac, cameras pointed at my house, and then across the street at the HOA president. She tried to control the narrative, claiming I was lying. But the documents spoke louder than her words. For the first time, I saw fear flicker across her face as the spotlight turned against her. But the real blow was still to come. When the legal system finally caught up with her, the fallout unfolded faster than anyone expected. County officials launched an investigation, uncovering that the HOA had not only targeted me, but had been overstepping their boundaries for years. They had issued fines to homeowners outside their jurisdiction, collected fees without proper documentation, and even threatened foreclosure where they had no authority. The cease and desist I sent was now bolstered by government scrutiny. The HOA board was ordered to halt all enforcement activities until the investigation concluded. For the president, this was devastating. Her power crumbled almost overnight. Neighbors who had once stayed silent began speaking out. Formerly fearful homeowners came forward with their own stories, some even joining together in a class action lawsuit. The HOA's attorney quickly withdrew, unwilling to defend an organization so deeply entangled in misconduct. As for me, I received an official letter from the county confirming that my property was not, and never had been, part of the HOA. The letter made it clear that any Further attempts at harassment would carry severe legal consequences. The once intimidating woman across the street was now reduced to retreating indoors whenever she saw me. Her clipboard was gone, her posture no longer confident. Word spread that she was facing personal liability for misuse of HOA funds and fraudulent enforcement. My home, once the target of endless harassment, finally felt like the peaceful sanctuary I had hoped for. The yard was quiet, the neighbors friendlier, and the oppressive shadow of the HOA had lifted. The irony was not lost on me. She had tried to drive me out, but instead, she had exposed herself and her board for what they truly were. In the end, all it took was standing firm, documenting everything, and refusing to bend to false authority. And with that, the HOA Karen who once demanded I leave immediately was the one left powerless, while I enjoyed the very home she swore I could never keep.